Chapter 3, text, I believe, 38. Well, of course, you all have devices now. Everybody has devices. That's the new thing. I hope you don't have any vices, just have devices. Of course, down in Trinidad, where I sometimes go, they say, everything is D. So they say, oh, device. That's not so good. But device in America is neutral. Let's see if I got the number right. Karma Yoga, 38. Yeah, I got it right. All right, got all the devices up and running, everything. Dumena Priyate Vanir Yatha Darsho Malena Cha Yetol Binavrito Garbhas Tatati Nedamavritam Dumena Priyate Vanir Tadarsho Malena Cha Binavrito Garbhas Tatine Damavritam. Few volunteers.
Dhumena vriyate vanir Yatha darsho malena cha Yathol vena vrito garbhas Tatha te nedam tamavritam Dhumena vriyate vanir Yatha darsho malena cha Yathol vena vrito garbhas Tatha tene damavritam.
So I'll just read myself the word meanings, just we don't have so much time, and I tend to dive into the ocean of philosophy each time I speak. Dumena means by smoke. Avriyate is covered. Vani, fire. Yata, just as. Adarsha, mirror. Malina, by dust. Cha, also. Yata, just as. Ubena, by the womb. Avrita is covered. Garbha, embryo. Tata, so. Dina, by that lust. Idam, this. Abditam is covered. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. Please repeat. As fire is covered by smoke.
As fire is covered by smoke.
As a mirror is covered by dust.
As a mirror is covered by dust.
Or as the embryo is covered by the womb.
Or as the embryo is covered by the womb.
Living entity is similarly covered.
Living entity is similarly covered.
By different degrees of this lust.
By different degrees of this lust.
Purport. There are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust. In other words, it's nothing but lust. Under different manifestations, like smoke in the fire, dust on the mirror, and the womb about the embryo. That means the embryo is surrounded by the womb. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be a little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. You see the implication here that Krishna consciousness is the real thing. It's the pure state, it's the natural state, it's the original state. So, to the extent we're not Krishna conscious, we're covered over to different degrees of thickness of covering. Although fire is necessary when there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror of the mind by so many spiritual methods. The best process to chant the holy names of the Lord. And Cheto Darpana Marshan cleans the mirror of the mind, the dust from the mirror of the mind. The embryo is covered by the womb. Covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position for the child in the womb. Is so helpless that he cannot even move. This stage of living condition can be compared to that of the trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. It's like, what is it? Manigriva and Alakuvara, our old friends. And actually, they were very fortunate because they were turned into trees, but they were in Nanda Maharaj's courtyard. It's a pretty lucky place to be, even if you're a tree. So it worked out okay for them. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke-covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, a living entity may revive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he makes further development, the fire of spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire can be made to blaze. Now, we got to remember, we can't get confused here, because we have to remember that the same image can be used for very, very different analogies. So we hear about samsara, davanali, we're trying to put out that fire. This is fire in a different context. This fire, it's an example where you're trying to get the fire to blaze. Like if you're cooking in the woods or something like that, or just cooking with firewood, you want the fire to, expand. And so this time we want the fire. This kind of fire we want. It's a fire of, you can say, consciousness. Therefore, the human form of life is a chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy, lust, by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance. As fire is covered by smoke, as the mirror is covered by dust, as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. There's dust and there's lust. This is Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Prabhupada ki jai. So I mean, I have if I were younger, I would look forward to writing essays and articles about epistemology. I'm just so attracted to that subject. And so this guy's weird with epistemology. What the heck is that? I'm attracted to that subject because it has so much to do with, it relates to faith, it relates to knowledge, it relates to the way we see things, paradigms. Epistemology is a subject like when we're studying, I met one of, quote, my students from about 12 years ago. He used to be Amul. He's not here, he's in some meeting, but he may come soon, I think. His name now is
Namarasa.
Namarasa, fabulous name. So he actually I gave a seminar in this subject. We were just bringing that up because the context is when we're studying Bhakti Shastri or Bhakti Vaibhava. I think anyway. We hear that there are different themes in Prabhupada's books. We hear one theme is material conditioning, one theme is Ishvara or the Lord, one theme, of course, is and when knowledge is a theme also in the book. But it's all knowledge, right? So what does it mean by knowledge? Well, he could have, Srila Prabhupada doesn't use this word so often, but he could have just as easily said another theme is epistemology. If you draw circles, bigger and bigger circles in philosophy, the core at the center, you're talking about metaphysics, ontology, epistemology, ethics. Those are like the most centralized, general, philosophical categories. So epistemology, etymologically, it means knowledge about knowledge. So that's what we're really talking about. When you hear that knowledge is a theme in Prabhupada's books, it means knowledge. It means knowledge about knowledge. What is knowledge? What can we know? Can we know anything? How can we justify our beliefs? How can we overcome the skeptical onslaught about knowledge? And the history of philosophy has been very prominent. So what does this have to do with all this business about mirrors and smoke and embryos and all these things that we're hearing about here? Because the thesis, which I'm going to propose at this moment for your edification, is that purification has everything to do with whether we're actually gaining or having access to real knowledge. In Ishopanishad, Srila Prabhupada uses many pages in his purports to distinguish between real knowledge and mistaken knowledge, real knowledge and false knowledge, real knowledge and so-called knowledge. So how pure we are, our senses. So Krishna consciousness, we're hearing about, and Prabhupada in the purport, we say in modern American English, it cuts to the chase. Srila Prabhupada gets right into the subject of how we get cured, how to overcome these coverings. Now the coverings have everything to do with the modes of material nature. So I'm going to read a verse from the first canto. And this is, reading this, I won't have time. It's very interesting how the images in this verse are so similar to what we just heard. And it kind of expands on the logic and the philosophy of what Krishna is teaching, and Srila Prabhupada is expounding and clarifying in this text 38. Bhaktiva daruno dumas tasmad agnis trayimayaha tamasastu rajas tasmad sattvam yad brahma darshanam. Firewood is a transformation of earth, but smoke is better than the raw wood. And fire is still better, because by fire we can derive the benefits of superior knowledge through Vedic sacrifices. Similarly, passion, rajas, is better than ignorance, tamas. But goodness, sattva, is best, because by goodness one can understand, can become uplifted and understand the absolute truth. And of course, that's the whole purpose of human life. So, the homework assignment, you can figure out how these two verses kind of connect and interrelate to each other, and how the message becomes expanded. You put the two verses together. So purification is indispensable for developing proper perception and knowledge. I see in my downtime, I don't want to waste time, so I read every day. I'm reading philosophy, and I'm finding that the intelligence is very strong. The intelligence, buddhi yoga. What does Krishna say? He says so many things, right? What does he say in chapter 18, text 7? There's no purport. I'm allowed to quote the verse even though there's no purport? Of course. Adyeshate chiya imam dharmyam sammadam avayaho gyanajagena tenaham ishtaksham imematehi. And I declare, O Arjuna, I'll say it very clearly, that one who studies this sacred conversation of ours verily worships me by his intelligence. So intelligence, the basic idea is to see everything in a proper perspective. And there is that ability, like when they made the atomic bomb, they had to have a lot of intelligence. I mean, it's just like, they spent $1 billion in money of that time, and you can imagine how much money that is nowadays. And they all had to keep a secret. And imagine how so many men I think they couldn't even tell their wives. I mean, it's just like hundreds and thousands of men had to keep a secret all that time. They spent so much money in the Manhattan Project and all that. So it's very, very, it required tremendous intelligence, patience, and in, what was it, New Mexico, Los Alamos, it actually worked. And it was Oppenheimer, he chanted, Kalos me lokam shayatrit pravido. He knew, he was cultured, right? So he had so much intelligence, he even read Bhagavad Gita. But his intelligence was Amishud, it wasn't pure. See, that's the problem. So we need Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam. We need that kind of intelligence that comes from studying Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita delivers the broadest kind of intelligence. So we won't make atom bombs and nuclear bombs. We'll do something a little bit more, auspicious than that. Prabhavam Juga Karmana Shayaya Chakato Gita. It says in Bhagavad Gita, they engage in horrible, unbeneficial works meant to destroy the world. Srila Prabhupada makes the epitome of an understatement in a purport. He says, they're not meant for the, what does he say, for the welfare of the world, not by a long shot. So these are people who, their intelligence is impure. They take shelter of such conclusions, asatyama pratistamte jagarahuranishvaram, etc. They say this world is unreal. Well, we also say it sometimes, but we don't go the whole 9 yards, more modern American English, as they do. And worse, they say asatyam apratista, there is no basis. And anishvara, there's no God in control. We don't go that way. So there's a demon. It's called the demon. So we have to become purified so that even when we have big intelligence. See, the simple definition, it applies both for suras and asuras. In other words, both for devotees, demigods, and demons. The basic definition is, if we had time, I would call for contributions and all that, and makes it interactive and, kind of jazz it up a little bit. But we got no time. So, I learned my lesson last night at the Om Shakti Center, and I got the hook. So the basic definition, the entry-level definition we can say, is to see everything in the proper perspective. On the mental platform, you're just reacting to stimuli, and the mind is saying, this will be really nice, this I don't like, this I like, but there's no, like a child is like on the mental, he's not, the parent, as we often hear, the parent has to supply the intelligence for the child. Even materially speaking, the child sees some bottle of liquid, looks like Coca-Cola or something, and it's actually poisonous, and the child is ready to grab it and just drink it without even thinking about, wait, I better check this out, So to see things in the proper perspective, in the broader perspective, and that was required in the invention of nuclear weapons. They had to have a very broad perspective. They had to go deeply into science, split the atom, E equals MC squared. To deal with these things that sound so abstract, but it actually worked. Jai. So, we say Jai, and they were saying Jai in some American equivalent of it in New Mexico. I heard that if it didn't work, he would have been in big trouble, Oppenheimer and Teller. They really would have been severely punished. But it worked. Jai. But actually, it's a total disaster. So to have the broad picture, it says in Srimad Bhagavatam in Kapila Shiksha, Jnana Vairagya Yuktena Bhakti Yogena Chatmana Pari Pashat Yudashinam. What is it? Prakratim Chahato Ojasam. The ojas, the potency of material energy, becomes hatha, becomes reduced, becomes demolished. The potency of the material energy. When one is engaged by the practice of devotional service and equipped with sufficient knowledge and detachment, Jnana Vairagya Yuktena Bhakti Yogena Chatmana Paripashat Udasina, he becomes indifferent, he becomes neutral to the, like Krishna says, Mata Sparshas, you have to tolerate, he becomes neutral to the dualities of the material world. Udashina, he becomes kind of indifferent to material existence. Prakratim cha hatha ojasam. The ojas becomes hatha, becomes knocked down of prakriti. That means apada prakriti, the material energy. So the key word there is paripashati, to see things in the proper perspective. So okay, that works, that's intelligence. But again, it requires something more than that. When I'm reading this philosophy, I see so much intelligence. Some of these philosophers are really sharp, and they really analyze things very, very minutely. But then, when it gets down to it, you read philosophy, what they have to say about the self, and they just say they're in the bodily conception of life. They're not informed. It's been pointed out in Western philosophy, especially by Sahotra Swami. He left us some wonderful works like Substance and Shadow. The whole book is about epistemology, knowledge about knowledge. And what does he talk? He compares Eastern philosophy with Western philosophy. And in terms of what their epistemology is, in Western philosophy is what we know from the Vedic teachings, is Pratyaksha and Anuman. And he describes it as a battle between, the idealists and the empirical, the two schools of thought. But they don't know about Shabda. They don't know about hearing from authority. That there are others, like almost all of us, who, although not well versed in spiritual knowledge, also attain the supreme. They become freed from samsara, from birth and death, because of their tendency to hear from authority. Just because of that tendency to hear from authority. So shruti, shabda, hearing from actual authority, is so potent. And Srila Prabhupada is, I was mentioning the other night, is like anyone who is even beginning to know Srila Prabhupada, to experience Srila Prabhupada, and understand and hear about his biography and his teachings, his life and teachings, you know, you become, the more you hear, and it doesn't stop. You know, it's like unlimited increase in appreciation and wonder and awe that this is not an ordinary personality. You know, Prabhupada said his own spiritual method, he's a Vaikuntha man. So we can say Prabhupada is also a Vaikuntha man, and mean it also. He's not ordinary. It's like, I'm not saying if you, well, I'm in this organization, you know, ISKCON, he's the founder, so, you know, I gotta say things like that. No, it's not like that. I'm not like that. I'm too independent in my way of thinking. I was accused of being an independent thinker by one of the major ISKCON authorities, which you all know very well, I won't mention his name. So, Srila Prabhupada, more and more and more as the years go by, for some of you as the months go by. Months turn into years, years turn into decades, decades turn into lifetimes. But, you know, he's our master, birth after birth, because he is humbly speaking from Vedic authority. I think it was Umapati. He was saying he had doubts, he asked her, Prabhupada, so Prabhupada, I like you very much, you're very nice, but how do I know that what you're saying is actually the truth? And Prabhupada simply said, I only speak for the scriptures. And the devotee was satisfied. I personally saw in 1966, I saw Srila Prabhupada opening up this big book. I think it was Chaitanya Charitamrita in Bengali. And he put on his spectacles. And he said, wow, this Swami is a little different from the others that I was told to go listen to. I mean, he's really like a scholar, and you know, he's like delivering knowledge that's coming from some ancient, deep source. So hearing from authority is very important. What does it have to do with uncovering this? So we become purified through hearing. What is that? Shinvatam Svakata Krishna Punya Shavana Kirtana Bhadato Dajani Vidunoti is to cleanse, to cleanse. Sarit Satam Satam Prashadam Amavirya Samvido. What is it? Bhavanti Ritkarna Rasayana Kata. What is it? Josh Pavargami. And then Shraddha, Fakir, Bhaktir, Anukrimishati, like a natural sequence, will become uplifted. We'll have faith, and faith will develop into attachment and actual devotion. Just by hearing from devotees, hearing from authority. So that means that we will become purified by such hearing. And just some examples of how, and when I say this, it's going to sound, you know, if you know what's going on, like if you all, many of you, most of you work and associate in your jobs or businesses, you associate, you know what's going on out there. You probably are unfortunately reading the news and et cetera, et cetera. You know, it's a mad world. Was that a Broadway musical? It's a mad world. So it is. It's getting worse all the time. And the problem is that it's a mad world, and it makes us crazy too, because we're being like disoriented by all the lies and all the you know, et cetera, et cetera. So when I read this, it's going to sound very familiar, that what's out there. This is, I guess it's the chapter, The Prayers of the Personified Vedas. I'll just read the translation. 10.87.25, for those of you who like details. I'm getting a little hoarse. Supposed authorities, who declare that matter is the origin of existence. Hello, Mr. Hawking, wherever you may be right now. He left us very recently. When he passed, very unfortunate for him and for everyone else, he became like, again, the whole 9 yards atheist. He wasn't like that in the 90s. He really let himself get, enshrouded by real deep. He became like the heavy coverings we're hearing about. So that declare that matter is the origin of existence. So we don't need God. We have M theory and gravity. But that's not nothing. How did everything begin? How did gravity begin? How did all the laws, how did that start? I mean, come on, let's get real. He's even said, not only, of course it's not polite to criticize someone who's deceased because they can't fight back, but he had his day in court. He wrote his last book, was called The Grand Design, and it's been very, very popular, unfortunately. And he was saying, no, you don't need God. It's just and we don't need philosophy. Not only don't we need religion, philosophy is also. And Nietzsche said God is dead, but he didn't say philosophy is dead. And now Hawking saying, not only is religion dead, but philosophy is useless. It might as well be dead. Supposed authorities who declare that matter is the origin of existence, that the permanent qualities of the soul can be destroyed. Sounds familiar? Professor Kotowski. And that the self is compounded of separate aspects of spirit and matter. Yeah, in one sense, yes, we are. Like you read in Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 7, text 6, Sarvaya Vishukun, what is it? The one about of all. Anyway, there's some verses that we can tell you that living entities are a combination of spirit and matter. With matter on the outside, spirit on the inside. So when we talk about a living entity, we're talking about the embodied soul. Okay, we also can talk about that entity, but we're talking about the actual, let's call it the metaphysical entity. We're talking about the actual soul. Soul is not a combination of spirit and matter. I think we all understand that. It's back to 1.1 Krishna conscious philosophy. And matter, or that material transactions constitute reality. That material transactions constitute reality. Look at electric curtains. Srinathji ki jai. Okay, Haribo. We have just a few more minutes? Yes. So these are all, this is similar, this is like an expanded version of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, text 12. Mogaso, Mogakarmano, Mogigan. They're bewildered by atheistic and demoniac views. Their hopes for liberation, everything is destroyed. So we don't want to go this way. All such authorities, or so-called authorities, base their teachings on mistaken ideas that hide the truth. The dualistic conception that the living entity is produced from the three modes of material nature is simply a product of ignorance. Such a conception has no real basis in you. This is, they're praying to the Lord, obviously, who are transcendental to all illusion and always enjoy perfect total awareness. So we have to overcome the four defects of the conditioned soul, and there's one verse that's very telling here. it describes Indriyai, I'll just read the translation, 4.22.30. Sanat Kumara instructing Prithu Maharaj. He's a heavy hitter since Prithu Maharaj is Shakti Vaishavatar and Sanat Kumara, first sons of Lord Brahma. And the bachelors, young bachelors. Actually, they were the oldest, but they kept themselves like little babies. When one's mind and senses are attracted to sense objects for enjoyment, that's called lust, the mind becomes agitated. As a result of continually thinking of sense objects, one's real consciousness almost becomes lost, like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the big grass straws on the bank. You've seen lakes like that sometimes on the bank, the huge grasses as low as the ceiling. They drink a lot of water. So, in other words, our intelligence becomes diverted by, that obsession that we have, that object that we're thinking about, meditating on the objects of the senses. So what happens to our intelligence? It becomes practically lost. We don't have intelligence. Or our intelligence becomes most impure, and that could be dangerous for the world, as we were pointing out. So, all right, what did I want to say here? Look at my card. It says, related topic, intelligence, simple definition, confirmation, seeing things in their right perspective. We did that one. Give examples of impure intelligence, nuclear weapons, Hare Krishna. And then I did everything I was supposed to do. So, I'll read the verse again. As fire is covered by smoke. Okay, we could have talked about the three modes of material nature, and the thicker the covering, the lower the mode. It's kind of simple thing to understand. As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb, the living entity is similarly covered by the different degrees of this lust. I'll just throw in one Prabhupada given analogy that he describes how when there's a fire and the sparks fly out of the fire, most of you have heard this, I think. Of course, we're like sparks and Krishna's like the great fire, analogously. But what happens when the fire, when the spark ends up in dry grass, it could get reignited very easily. So that would be like the mode of goodness. When the fire ends up in earth, problem, it'd be like the mode of passion. And when the fire ends up in water or some really wet mud or something like that, it's like the mode of ignorance. It becomes more hopeless almost to reignite the spark. So we're like those sparks, and we don't want to be extinguished perpetually, indefinitely, what to speak of forever. So we have to, fan the spark, fan the fire of devotion in others and also in ourselves. So thank you for your kind attention. Does anyone would like to, I know I would always listen to these old recordings of Sadhaputa's classes, and we have someone present here who always asks questions in those classes. He has so many questions, sometimes Sadhaputta would have a little chuckle under his breath when you hear the
When he was living with us in Lake Huntington, he was sometimes reluctant to give class because he knew there'd be some questions.
But yes, great questions. I think you appreciate it. So,
You have a question?
all right, let's give it a go. It's just like old times.
So it seems that there's a very important relationship between intelligence and faith, because two people can hear the same knowledge being presented, and yet one person can absorb it and one person won't be able to absorb it. So I was going to ask if you could talk a little bit about that idea of the relationship of faith, which is a real underpinning in epistemology. How, on what basis can we develop that faith?
Right. Yeah, well, I can't help but also, remind you of that we're talking about purification also, the importance of purification. So faith, just like everything else, at the beginning of chapter 17, we have faith in the three modes of material nature. And Srila Prabhupada says that's why there's so many religions in the world. There's so many faiths. Originally, faith comes from the mode of goodness. And that's the kind of faith that is exalted. That's the kind of faith, and we hear about advancement in Krishna consciousness as to how strong is our faith. But that's original, that's pure, or at least virtually pure faith. So not to complicate the thing. But Rabindra Swarup Prabhu points out that the Krishna consciousness, we're getting a chance to reboot the whole system with Krishna consciousness. We have a limited, it's just like, Srila Prabhupada is like connecting us, going deep, deep, deep down into our free will. And what does our free will actually consist of? To serve Maya or to serve Krishna. But Rabindra Swarup Prabhu, he points out how Srila Prabhupada is actually giving us, or Krishna consciousness as presented by Srila Prabhupada, is actually giving us a chance to decide, actually, make a decision where I'm going to place my faith. Because everybody is placing their faith somewhere or something, but most people do it without even thinking about it. They don't even question that I'm placing my faith in my senses. I mean, they don't, bodily conception of life, it seems like it's just too deep for them to even consider what they're doing, or it's just too much with them. So we were doing that habitually, and we're all going through a paradigm shift. We're all going through this idea of, pulling up the anchor, where my security, my faith. Faith means, what is my shelter? What am I taking shelter of? Taking it out of sense gratification and money, promise of future sense gratification. Of course, we can spend millions and millions of dollars for Krishna. It's the goddess of fortune, not a problem. But when the goddess of fortune becomes Durga, or money, it's a problem. They say an old saying, money is the root of all evil. So if we place our faith not in the goddess of fortune, but in money, what is that money? It just means the potential for more sense gratification, really, unless one is Krishna conscious. So, Rabindra Swarup Prabhu puts it very succinctly. He says, placing our faith is an act of buddhi. And we get the real buddhi from Bhagavad Gita. We're worshipping Krishna with our intelligence. So our intelligence is becoming purified by worshipping Krishna with it, spiritualized. So it's a very, very deep thing. We can actually, it's work, We can actually pick up our faith and dig it out, like pull up the anchor. That means change where I'm putting my shelter, there's that verse in chapter 5, text 17 of Bhagavad Gita, Tad buddhya tad atmanas tamishtat tad parayana ginamrita, what is it? Gachant imudavritim jnanam jnana nirduta kalmasha. When one's let me just give me a second. I just want to read the exact chapter 5, text 17. When one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge or shelter are all fixed in the Supreme, then one becomes fully enlightened of misgivings through complete knowledge, and thus proceeds straight on the path of liberation. So, in other words, faith is included. In other words, we have to take our faith, and it's a scary thing. It's like a leap of faith, Kierkegaard. The idea of, it takes courage, because we have doubts. But jnana nirduta kalmasa, that will become purified, and our doubts will, our doubts will become reduced, and will become strong in Krishna consciousness and advance, because the stronger my faith, then the weaker my doubts, and vice versa. So everyone has faith, faith and knowledge, Rabindra Swarup seminar and all that. Everyone has faith, but most people don't question, what am I really placing my faith in? Fallible soldiers, heard about that. Anyway, I couldn't really answer your question. I'm just kind of peripherally touching on it. It's I'm just not sharp enough to pinpoint an answer. Just throwing out some related suggestions. Anyone else have any question or comment? Yes.
My question is intelligence actually required for faith? Because in the story with the shoemaker and the priest had a lot of intelligence, right? About the scriptures and everything, but still the shoemaker's faith was stronger, right? That's why he went to Krishna like after the next lifetime and
Shoemaker or
Cobbler.
cobbler?
Yeah, cobbler.
Oh, he was a cobbler. Okay, you mean the one that when he heard that Lord Narayan was threading an elephant through a needle, he goes, "Oh, my Lord is so wonderful." But then he had intelligence too, because he could explain it. He could explain it logically. You know, if you take an acorn or something, you have such a huge tree can fit in that little tiny acorn. Of course, he can. So of course, the skeptic would come up with some very banal arguments, but the point is that so that was a question that so he had faith, but also he wasn't devoid of intelligence. So your question is, what about blind faith, something like that? Is that what you mean? Like, can you just be faithful without being able to rationalize?
Yeah.
Yes, but you come to the Krishna conscious movement. The food is great, the music is fabulous, it's far out, it's completely international, and here we're semi-international, we're working on it, and really, it's far out, but at a certain point, you may lose interest, you may find other things that are fun, you may want to go to the circus or something like that, so. Or let's say you're in Krishna consciousness and you get fried. Ever hear that expression? We tell you devotees get fried. All too often you hear that. I'm fried, So, then devotees made bloop. Actually, that word bloop was 1966 or 67, and it's like they asked the Prabhupada, "Where is such and such?" And he said, "Oh, he blooped." And Prabhupada said, "What is that?" And someone made it up, and Prabhupada started using that term. And he bloop. So, bloop means, like you fall into the ocean of material, the rock makes us sound like bloop.
In the second chapter, those two verses, one falls down into the material. Falls down. It ends by saying he falls down into the material pool.
Yeah.
So, bloop.
Bloop, it's an onomatopoetic sound, bloop. So anyway, it's not really a laughing matter. Blooping, it sounds funny, but it's a very serious problem. It's called in theology apostasy, something like that, when someone leaves the fold, so to speak. So, and what I'm saying is that intelligence and being able to have a rational understanding of why I have faith in this is like a safety net. When things are not going so well on the, my day-to-day level, and you're getting fried, and my authority mistreated me, one can feel like that, or maybe it actually happened. Then you kind of go off and get depressed and start thinking about your karmi friends that you used to have, and maybe I should hook up with them again. So many things happen. So if we have a philosophical basis, a philosophical conviction, and the ability to, some people are more articulate than others, but at least to think it through. In other words, it kind of makes sense. When I first joined, the fifth canto came out. And I was just joined, I was hanging around. I was a fringy, we called it. We didn't have congregation members so much, we had fringies. People who were not living in the temple and doing something, chanting or something. So I joined, actually. They were surprised that I joined. I actually joined. And they got more than they bargained for. But Anyway, the fifth canto came out, and it sounded weird. I mean, this is like too much. I don't want to join some mythology or something like that. And so I said, hey, look, you guys, and if you tell me that 2 and 2 is 5, I'm blooping. Back to the blooping idea. And so fortunately, the Bhakti Vrata Institute was just being established and next door in Boston. I joined in Boston at 70 Com Ave. We went 72 Com Ave. And then I didn't get too much direct from Swarup Damodar at the time, Brahmacharya, I guess. But Sadhuputa Prabhu and Madhava Prabhu, they both attended to my problem. And, at least I was humble enough to say, well, these guys are PhDs. Richard Thompson, Sadhuputa's got a PhD in mathematics. And I became so intoxicated as a hippie. The first thing that goes down is your math scores. I used to get 95s. I was like a smart kid. But then every semester my math score went down 5 points, so all my scores went way down. Especially math is the first victim of intoxication. You just can't get it. So, I lost it. So anyway, so he's a PhD in mathematics, and and he's accepts this. So, and they weren't preaching science to me. They were preaching epistemology about our imperfect senses. Because I came back, and I don't have time to go on and on. But my point is that, as I said, if I wasn't convinced that Krishna consciousness was rational, because part of being rational is understanding the limits of rationality, understanding the limits of logic. Sadhuputa himself points that out in many lectures. But at the same time, you need that as far as it goes. And if I wasn't convinced, I don't know, what would I be? I'd probably be dead, but I wouldn't be getting Prabhupada's mercy. Because fortunately, there is, Sadhuputa Prabhu was particularly ingenious in being able to, you talk about bridge speeching. Now that's a huge bridge. And he was able to do it scientifically, mathematically, logically, and show in a very vivid way that there's nothing. He used to do his class about how Prajapati Daksha functioned with the head of a goat. And we read this, come on, I'm not going to believe that. I mean, that's got to be mythology, But no, we can't do that. Prabhupada was insisting, not half a hand, you have to accept it in total. Very challenging statements. You read Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, text 21. Nakshatranam aham shashi, of the stars, I am the moon. Now, Srila Prabhupada could have just left it like that and leave it to our own, figure it out. But in the purport, he just says, no, it's not right that there's only one. Now, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe some of you would bloop. But no, don't do that. But he said you read the Bhagavad Gita, all of you, so you read that and you survived. Reading that, no, it's not that all the stars have a light. There's only one sun and they're reflecting. That's so challenging and so different. I'm sorry if you haven't read that. I'm sorry to expose you to that. But, we're big boys and girls, most of us, and we have to be able to deal with this. So how do we deal with that? That's a whole subject. But my point is that even that, Sadhuputa Prabhu can give a coherent and a rational explanation. So, it helps. Blind faith is okay, but it may not last too long. That's the point. Okay, one last comment or question. Okay.
Just a quick comment. That isn't that level of conviction in our philosophical understanding also one of the definitions that define Uttama, Madhyama, etc. Like someone who's able to very strongly defend based on arguments, and that person is a Madhyama, and the one who's even stronger is Uttama, and so on.
No, Madhyam is described as sometimes not able to defeat all arguments. His scriptural knowledge and his philosophical acumen may not be on the top level, but the faith is very, very strong. You're not going to shake him. He's not going to fall down. He may not be able to defeat you, but you're not going to be able to defeat him. You're not going to be able to make him fall down. I saw in Harinam in Boston, there was a devotee, they got initiated the same time I did. And one Mataji, young lady, she just had a baby. And anyway, or she was just about to have a baby, I don't remember. And she was, we were on Harinam in Harvard Square, and she got involved in this long conversation with a non-devotee physician, a doctor. And he was, quote unquote, preaching to her that if you don't give your child meat, then he's going to become stunted, and he won't grow properly, and he'll be lethargic, and he'll, he was giving all these scientific, reasons. So she became, I won't say deviated, but definitely distracted. So, this is why faith is so important. And then, we can find out how, of course nowadays people know that vegetarian diet doesn't mean you're going to become stunted or something. So, could you repeat your question again?
No, it's just that the definition of Madhyama Uttama is based also on some of this conviction levels.
Yeah, well, there are two different contexts. One is dealing with neophytes. Now, these neophytes are pretty advanced neophytes. The four Kumars, what was the others? The one needing wealth was Dhruva Maharaj, I think. I mean, these are pretty, amazing that they're. I still don't understand that, but this is like eligibility to begin practicing sadhana bhakti. So then that's based a lot on faith. And then in the 11th canto, there's a kind of a broader division of. Now sometimes Prabhupada would merge these together or conflate them, but in other places there'll be a separate analysis. And the other one is a more general sense of how advanced one is in devotional service. And that's a whole, we don't have time to discuss now, but it's a whole different kind of analysis. But yeah, dealing with faith, that's there. It's a neophyte, his faith can be easily broken. The madhyam, you're not going to break his faith very easily at all. You may never be able to do it, even though he may not be able to defeat you in arguments. And then the uttama means that, it's like a guru level, it's, of course, not that every guru has to be uttama. I wouldn't want to put it that way. But it's tasmad gurun prapadyeta jigyasu shreya uttamam shade pare chanishnatam raman upashamasha. That he knows the scripture and he's able to convince others that scripture. So his faith is very strong. So I don't want to keep you any longer. We're all anxious to go into the next part of the program. Thank you so much for giving me a little extra time.